I cannot see everybody. I'm just trying to see if everyone is on the call. Kirsten won't be joining us this evening, but just want to make sure everyone else is here.
Dwana, I think we have everybody. I think we have all of our board members that we expected this evening.
Okay. All right. Perfect, Tom. Thank you. Well, then I would like to call the public forum for the Des Moines School Board to order for Tuesday, December 1st. Ms. Jenkins, can you please take the roll?
Mr. Barron.
Here.
Ms. Bradley.
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Cody.
Here.
Ms. Della Gardell. Ms. Martirano.
Here.
Ms. Sawyer.
Here.
We provide speakers at the forum an opportunity to address the board for up to 3 minutes regarding items that are not on the board agenda. If anyone wishes to speak to this forum, please send an email to Ms. Jenkins at aaron.jenkins@dmschools.org. Speakers will be called forward individually, and we ask that you please state your name and address. Please note that if you are a student speaker, you do not need to provide your address to the board. Guests of the board are encouraged to speak to matters relating to the program, services, and operations of DMPS. Please remember that Iowa law prohibits us from discussing specific employees or their job performance. Please avoid reference to personalities or character attacks, as those types of comments do not contribute to the purpose for which this public forum exists. Thank you for your support of our school district. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, this public forum is not a time for board engagement and discussion, as it is our obligation to discuss only matters posted in the public agenda for the sake of transparency and opportunity afforded to all community stakeholders. Matters requiring attention will receive appropriate staff and/or board follow-up at a time after the meeting. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
We do. Lyric Sellers.
Hello, me and Andy are speaking together today.
That's fine.
Okay, I'm Lyric Sellers. Do we turn the camera on?
If you would like, you can.
Hello, I am Lyric Sellers, a junior at East High School. Andy, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Andy Montalvo Martinez. I'm a first-gen Chicano and I'm a senior at East High School.
First, I'd like to address the media bias that DMPS has displayed regarding SROs. When we as a district preach anti-racism as we incorporate and fund a systemically racist institution rooted in white supremacy, it makes us look uncommitted. Working as hard as we do for SRO removal, only to see the media displaying pictures of SROs with a bunch of Black students from 4 years ago, but not using the media to uplift the perspectives of your BIPOC students seems an awful lot like propaganda. And it's hard to believe that we are fighting for the same thing when it feels like we are fighting you for it. When you see your students fighting for change, you must keep in mind that liberation does not predicate a conservative approach. Selling us this idea of reform isn't going to solve the problem. You cannot continue to put a standing home on a broken foundation. So how much data, how much of our trauma and our fight do we have to plead before you make radical systemic change? You can't preach equity while your white students and your white staff have the privilege of not feeling policed and profiled in a learning environment. In order to be the model for urban education, you have to do things that haven't been done before.
We are no longer catering to your whiteness in order to be taken seriously, because anti-racism is not an afterthought. In your open letter to the community over the summer, you stated, "I stand with our students of color. I stand with you, not just in word, but in deed." Becoming the model for urban education means reimagining what safety looks like in our community and in our schools for all of our students. The model should be investing into something revolutionary and not being complicit to the violence and trauma inflicted onto your students of color. I wish the lived experiences of your students was enough. I wish the racial disparities was enough. I wish the $1.5 million that could be reinvested into your students was enough. Removing school resource officers is not easy, but it is central to racial justice in education. Anti-racism is not a lens you can put on and take off at your convenience. We need people who will lead and sustain revolutionary work to dismantle existing systems that are no longer working and to not gaslight students advocating for change. You're welcome for our time.
Thank you. Jocelyn Hildebrand.
Hello, I am Jocelyn Hildebrand. I'm 17 years old. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior at East High School. 2 years ago, I was physically attacked by another student at school, and I protected myself. After the fight, I was in the office, and the principal and SRO came in very hostile and yelled at me, saying that I assaulted the hall monitor who split up the fight. I ended up speaking with the hall monitor who told me he understood the altercation that I was in and that he was fine. Without my mom or any legal counsel present, the principal and SRO told me that I was being charged with assault on a staff member and could choose to go to what they said was jail and or go to court or be on probation while participating in a program called the Second Chance Program offered by DMPD and DMPS. As a victim of an assault, I was coerced into this program. My mother still believes it was completely unfair for me to be punished in any kind of way. Second Chance was taught by DMPD and their SROs. They took us to Polk County Jail, warning us not to end up there. They told us what incarcerated people wear, how they shower, and what they eat to try to scare us. SROs are not helping students. They are creating literal school-to-prison pipelines. There are statistics that prove BIPOC students are more likely to be victims of this. These statistics are from DMPS. I cannot imagine how much worse my experience would have been if I was not a white girl. Please do not let any SROs into our schools to impact anyone else's life like they did mine. You're welcome.
And that was our last speaker that was signed up.
Okay. Andy, Lyric, and Jocelyn, I want to thank you for your input. I know that Andy and Lyric, you have reached out to Dr. Ahart, and he will be following up with you. I will now close the public forum, and the regular school board meeting will reconvene at 6 p.m. Looks like I have 6 p.m. I would like to call the school board meeting for Tuesday, December 1st for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Ms. Jenkins, can you please take the roll?
Mr. Barron,
Here.
Miss Bradley,
Here.
Miss Caldwell Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Cody. Mr. Cody. Okay. Miss Delagardelle, Miss Martirano,
Here.
Miss Sawyer.
Here.
Cody is here.
Thank you.
The first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So moved, Caldwell Johnson.
Second by
Sawyer.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Ms. Sawyer. Please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Miss Bradley,
Yes.
Miss Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Miss Martirano,
Yes.
and Miss Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for Tuesday, November 17th, 2020. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
So moved, Martirano.
Second, Barron.
We have a motion by Ms. Martirano and a second by Mr. Barron. Please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Miss Bradley,
Yes.
Miss Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Miss Martirano,
Yes.
Miss Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from a special meeting on Sunday, November 22nd. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Move approval, Caldwell Johnson.
Second, Martirano.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Ms. Martirano. Please take the vote.
Mr. Barron, Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Miss Bradley,
Yes.
Miss Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Miss Martirano,
Yes.
Miss Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on the agenda is the consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please email Ms. Jenkins at aaron.jenkins@dmschools.org. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to the agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
We do not.
Okay. Ms. Sawyer, I believe you have the consent motion.
Yes, I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $1,935,406.02.
Do we have a second?
Second, Caldwell Johnson.
Are there any discussions or questions? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion by Ms. Sawyer and a second by Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Miss Bradley,
Yes.
Miss Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Miss Martirano,
Yes.
Miss Sawyer.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes 6-0. Next, we have a public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item D1, public hearing underground electrical easement agreement at 2323 Grand?
We do not have anybody signed up.
Okay, hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Superintendent Ahart, will you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board approve granting a permanent underground electrical easement to Mid-American Energy Company following a public hearing.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation?
This is Barron, I move approval.
Sawyer, second.
We have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Ms. Sawyer. Any questions or discussion? Please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on our agenda is E1, dropout prevention, maximum funding and tax levy rate request to the SBRC. Superintendent Ahart, will you please introduce the matter?
Yes, this is, I believe, the last of this series. We've had 3 of these in past meetings, recent meetings, where we're going to the School Budget Review Committee for additional spending authority, this time for dropout prevention. The maximum funding, which we're asking for approval, would be just shy of $11 million.
May I have a motion and a second to approve item E1?
This is Barron, I move approval.
Caldwell Johnson, second.
We have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Is there any discussion or any questions? Please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
and Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on our agenda is E2, monitoring report, 3rd grade reading. Dr. Ahart, are these going to be presented together?
Yes.
Okay.
They're 2 separate reports, but because there would be a lot of redundancy in the sharing of the data, we thought it made the most sense to do one presentation.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure of that. So Superintendent Ahart, I will turn this over to you and your team.
All right, thank you. So we have the first of our identified SMART goal reports tonight, the all 3rd grade reading and Black male 3rd grade reading. The numbers are not what we would have expected had we not had the interruption in our educational process last spring due to COVID-19, nor the kind of the stop and start in and out of virtual and hybrid and in person this fall. What we do have, though, is now a new, I guess I would characterize it as a new baseline. And as we'll share near the end, some concrete ideas about how we can improve things moving forward, knowing that we were making very good progress over the first 3 quarters of the FY20 school year. We feel like we have the right levers. We feel like we're integrating our anti-racism work with our instructional work and our MTSS system. We have some, a number of challenges, a lot of which relate to 2 things. The shifting back and forth from different modalities, and then more broadly, just having, hundreds and hundreds of teachers and leaders trying to adapt to a new mode of instruction, not to mention the challenges that brings with our families. So the data that we're going to share tonight is, I have to say, not surprising, and certainly not what we would have hoped to see, and certainly not where we would be had we not had the COVID-19 interruption. But that being said, You'll hear tonight that we do have our intervention systems back in place after some fits and starts with the challenges that the new school year brought, and some ideas about how we can solidify things as we move forward, at least for some period of time in the virtual environment. So with us tonight is our Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, Noelle Nelson, and our Director of Elementary Teaching and Learning, Kelly Schofield. And so I'll ask them to begin the presentation formally.
Great, thank you, Tom. Good evening, board. I'm Noelle Nelson. Thank you for the introduction. Tom framed this up well. One thing I do want to point out is our really intentional efforts to design an integrated approach. And so as we look at these data and as we see the decline, that we can, with confidence, know that COVID has certainly contributed to. I think it's important for all of us to remember that we had a literacy urgency to improve prior to COVID. So that hasn't changed. It's just more critical now than ever before that we double down on the work that we know was underway, was getting results. So as we look at these results and as we try to maintain discipline to our focus, it's important that we not start grasping for new or different solutions, but stay true to what the research says, stay true to what the science says, and stay focused on job one. So I do want to, before I turn it over to Kelly to get into the report, publicly recognize the work that our teachers and our school leaders have done. We have literally rebuilt an entire educational system in a new platform over the course of months. And we are just now, as Tom said, getting to a place where we can return to job one. Things are starting to stabilize, and we can focus on what we do best, which is teaching and learning. So Kelly, with that, I'll let you jump in.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're well. I'm Kelly Schofield. I'm going to kind of run through the presentation with you for the two board goals. So we are presenting the two board goals together tonight. Goal 1, the percent of all third grade students on track in reading will increase from 52% to 72% by June 2023 as measured by FAST. And then goal 2, the percent of Black male third grade students on track in reading will increase from 35% to 72% by June 2023 as measured by FAST. This slide is just a review of what the FAST assessment, what the suite of assessments assesses. FAST stands for Formative Assessment System for Teachers. It is a screener, so it casts a wide net. And as we move through this presentation and talk about percent of students meeting benchmark, I just want to remind you that that isn't necessarily equating to percent of students on grade level. Meeting the benchmark on the FAST assessment indicates that students are meeting the reading readiness benchmark. So it's just a little difference there. This talks about the different suite of assessments that it covers, and it's different in different grade levels. So kindergarten would have a different set of assessments than first grade, in second grade and third grade. It does move from like letter sounds all the way up to passage reading. And I do want to also say, I know we're looking through the lens, when we look at this data, we're looking through the lens of the instructional loss that happened during the shutdown and summer, but we also need to remember that this was a new modality for even assessing the students, because when we came back and the testing window opened, we were in virtual instruction, which was new to our teachers. And I want to echo what Noelle says. They have just really done amazing things to go from 0 to where we are now in their ability to teach in that modality. But assessing in it was new. So there was a learning curve on splitting their screen, using 2 screens. And then on the other side, students were at home or they were not at school. So they were also struggling, and there was a lot of support needed for them to be able to take the assessment. So building leaders, although devastated by the test scores and some of the losses, really feel and are seeing that things are picking up
now once everyone's getting used to how to give the progress monitoring and the assessment virtually. So I did want to bring up that point as well, because that was another new thing for our teachers to master. This just shows the public-facing dashboard for those of you that may not know about that. That's accessible through our website, so you're able to get up-to-date data as we move through those assessment windows for fall, winter, and spring through this dashboard that, again, is on our DMPS website. This is showing kind of a clip of what that dashboard has on that. So you're seeing two tables here. The top table is showing the percent of third grade students all students meeting the FAST benchmark, and the bottom one is the percent of our Black male students meeting the benchmark. You have the target and then the actual data. So you can see in fall of 2020, it's shaded red. We did not meet our targets this fall in 2020. But looking back to fall and winter for both student groups, we met or exceeded our targets. So we, as Noelle was saying, we have things in place and they were starting to show that progress and progress towards our goals and meeting targets. But we have slid back, and that shows in our fall data. This slide is showing 3-year trend data. So from fall of 2017 to fall of 2020 for both student groups. So the percent of students, of all students who met the benchmark from fall of 2020 to fall of, from fall of 2017 to fall of 2020 has decreased by 7%, as the third grade Black male students have also decreased by 7% in that 3-year window. So the same decrease for both student groups. This breaks it down for you a little bit more so you can see the trend over time between the two and compare the two student groups that we are presenting our board goals around tonight. From 2015, and we use 2015 as a starting place. It's really where we started to really support and get into the work around the science of reading, the foundational skills, and that systematic sequential phonics instruction. So we wanted to show kind of where we started that work and where we progressed. You can see that we had a gap or a difference in the two student groups between our all students and our Black male students of 17% for the first 3 years. But then we started to decrease that, right? We were starting to make some progress in decreasing that gap between those two student groups. And now in fall of 2020, we're back to the 17%. This is a demographic breakdown. So you're able to see this is third grade students for 3 years from fall of 2018 to fall of 2020 in the different student groups. You can, by this data, it shows us that our Black or African American students as a group and our Hispanic Latinx students lost the most ground. So they had the largest decrease in the percentage of students meeting benchmark. Our special education students stayed steady at 13%. And our white students were another group that didn't lose as much ground. They lost 30%. We're going to move to sort of the progress measures that lead up to our third grade data, our kindergarten, first, and second grade. This is also trend data, so we're looking over those 3 years from 2017. Our incoming kindergartners, all students, we had a decrease of 4% coming into the school year in the fall. Our Black male students meeting benchmark coming in as kindergartners actually increased from 2017 by 3.5%. First grade, we see the largest dip. Both student groups decreased by 24%. And those of you we have been meeting on that have been on the board for the last few years know that first grade has been a struggle year for us, and a point that we really have put a lot of effort and supports into. This decrease is also attributed to, if you think about in kindergarten, they really go through most of their skills and their learning around those foundational skills in the first part of the year. So come about mid-March to beginning of April, they've gone through the standards, they've gone through the skills, and the rest of the year is really about practicing and automaticity and really mastering those skills. When we left, their skills were really fragile. So this data is backing that up. That right when they needed that practice and that work around automaticity and applying that skill to connected text, they didn't have as much support. So we really did lose some ground there. But confident that we'll pick that back up. Then our second grade, our all student group decreased by 12% in that 3 years. Our Black male students meeting that benchmark decreased less than that, though about half. They decreased only by 6%. This slide is showing our DMPS compared to the state and the AEA, so the region around us. You can see that's showing fall of 19 to fall of 20. Statewide, there was a 10% decrease in the percentage of students meeting us, and this is K-3 collapse. So this is all K-3 students together. So there's that 10% was the decrease across the state. In our AEA, which is the region around us, it was a little bit less than that, 9%. And then DMPS as a whole for K-3 was slightly above, lost slightly above that 10% average. It was 11%. And then our DMPS Black males were at 12% for K-3. So really, even though we are lower in our percentage meeting the benchmark, we didn't lose more ground than students across the state. This slide and table is showing some cohort data. So looking at the group of students that were kindergarten last year when they left in March that are now first graders. So we looked at fall of 19, the students that were kindergartners then moving to first grade now. In both student groups, you see that large loss of 25% of students, 25% less students have met the benchmark. From first grade to second grade, that isn't as large of a drop. It's 16% and 14%. And then actually from second grade to third grade, we gained ground. Again, showing that that systematic work that we have been doing around reading instruction from kindergarten to third grade, it's really starting to stick. Once you start mastering those skills and using those skills, then you sometimes see a slide, like in summer, we talk about the summer slide, but if you've truly mastered them, you're going to dip less, right? So you're going to decrease less. So this is really showing, again, that the work we have been doing over the years, in the last few years, is really starting to close gaps and increase percentages of students meeting benchmarks and showing less decrease. Okay, so that's the data. We wanted to be able to, we're going to move into the response and some of the initiatives and levers that we have set as a district for ourselves to meet the board goals. But we wanted to be able to reference, when we move into talking about our action steps and our levers, that came from a process of working with our community problem solving, other collaborative problem solving groups, we meeting with task force, the anti-racist task force. So all of that together to come up with like, what are the actions that we need to do? Reading research, talking to different stakeholder groups. But we really wanted to focus our actions around what are we doing to support Black males? Because if we can apply actions that support our Black males, it's going to work for all students. We're going to increase all student scores. So this is just some bullet pointed actions that came from some research from 3 literacy researchers, and it was published in the Chicago Tribune. It's an article called "Low Expectations Can Be Deadly for African American Youth." So they went through and talked about the opportunity gap for students of color and what that means for their future, and then gave some specific strategies that would research-based that would support the learning and the success of our Black males. And you can see through there, there's some of the things that you've heard us talk about before, like increase the number of Black educators, especially our Black male educators, high quality curriculum and instruction and materials, focusing on that text that focus on the interest of our Black boys and Black males, cultural diverse books, instructional practices, really looking around those foundational skills, that phonics instruction, building vocabulary, and the other connection to literacy. And then the next slide continues talking about those opportunities for higher order classroom discussion. You hear us talk about access to grade level instruction many times for many reasons, our students aren't having access to the same instruction. So that's what this is referring to here. Summer literacy programs, intensive and ongoing anti-racist work, and engaging families. So those are things that these three researchers have shown would support Black males. So that then leads us, and I want to compare that to, these are the levers that our MTSS team, through the work of all of those other collaborative problem solving groups, and it's been vetted and given feedback, the NAACP leadership team, again, the anti-racist task force that we have. So we've had several groups that have looked at this and given us feedback around the action steps. That these levers in the universal tier and the foundational tier are really what focuses the work that we're doing. Implementation of high quality curriculum, access to grade level, data literacy and a balanced assessment system, and as you've heard at our last board meeting, our work around social emotional learning. And then the foundational tiers, we can't forget about those. So they're very important to our students to be successful in that engagement and community building, safety, and health and well-being. And then you see the equity arrow running up and down, because equity runs through all of those. And equity also includes our anti-racist work, and really thinking about through that lens and our biases and the barriers that we are setting up that are keeping our students from being able to access these foundational and universal levers. So from there, our literacy task force, which is a pre-K-12 task force, it's made up of educators, building leaders, department directors, ELL representation, special education representation. Also, we have success worker, community leaders on that team. And they are actually then coming up with the actions and monitoring the actions that came from the work from all the different problem solving groups. In that, and we have talked about this last year quite a bit, is the implementation of our EL curriculum. And last year we started implementing it in K-5. And moving into this year was the commitment that we would implement in 100% of our elementary schools K-5 and add 6-8. And we are doing that currently. So now it's from K to 8. With that, we have in the past, before we adopted this curriculum, had a foundational block for some of our schools that used OG, the Orton Gillingham phonics methodology or curriculum. Some schools are still using that, but this new curriculum comes with a very comprehensive phonics and foundational skill curriculum called K2 Skills Block, and we have about half of our schools that are using that, and we're supporting that as well. So we're supporting that with PD for leaders and coaches on implementation. We're supporting it through monitoring. So we have indicators that we are supporting schools with training and building leaders on what to look for in the classroom for these quality indicators of implementation. And that's an area that I feel like when I think Tom and Noel both talked about how we're getting back to job one here's an area where we have actually started in the last couple of weeks. Building leaders are really hungry for moving back to supporting instruction. They're able to get into more classrooms. We're setting up systems, getting video of teachers the instruction during this EL time, and then being able to take those videos. There's some brave teachers out there that are willing to share their instruction with us right now, and then being able to take that and look at it and talk about, okay, what are these instructional pieces that we should see, and what should it look like in virtual, and what feedback can we give to teachers. And we're really trying to learn and grow around that feedback loop, especially in this virtual setting, so that we're able to give teachers just really feedback that will help them with their instruction. So that is something that's coming up here as well. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, can you go back a slide just a second, Noelle? Sorry. I did want to highlight a couple other things on here. The pre-K and high school are looking at adopting curriculum. We want to make sure that we have a K-12 literacy plan. Pre-K has a curriculum, it's outdated, so they're looking at that. High school has curriculum materials, but they're not consistent across the district, so we're really looking at both of those. But I wanted to draw special attention to some work we're starting this year. So we implemented last year, and we really want to dig into and support some of the embedded pieces of the curriculum that were so important to us and why we chose it. And the diversity of the text, the social justice themes. There are community connections that are expected and built into the curriculum. So that, students are learning their background knowledge so that they can be productive members and active members to advocate for change and justice in their communities. So we want to really connect with those and support teachers around that. And then we've also been working with the SEL task force to align. There's an SEL component built into the curriculum as well. So to align that work so that we're working in tandem. So those are some action teams that have been set up and really kind of looking through that. And it supports the students in building that background knowledge and vocabulary and their connection to self and the community. Around access, we are teaming up with the Algebra Task Force to look at the way, what are our standard operating procedures for placement into programming, such as Gifted and Talented, GT, or special education, and then ELL services. So we want to ensure that those don't become barriers for students and that they are getting the services they need or deserve, but that we're not over-identifying or not identifying or not giving a service to students. So we want to look at that to ensure that it's equitable, and then strengthening our community partnerships. We did quite a bit of work early on. Like we built one of the things that I didn't actually talk about earlier, but we've spent a lot of time building Canvas courses. So taking our curriculum and putting it into Canvas to support teachers in this virtual modality. And we've had just thousands and thousands of teacher hours and curriculum coordinator hours putting into that support. But early on, we met with working with Allison and Vanessa, meeting with community partners, Metro Care Child, reaching out to child care providers to give some training and overview of the Canvas modules so that they are able to support the students' learning when they have students. That's something that we've done. But looking forward, we have an action team that's part of the task force that's made up of community schools, community schools, biliteracy liaisons, building and district leadership to kind of think about when students aren't at school, where are they, and how can we support them around literacy? What can we do to enhance and to grow their literacy skills? So that work is just starting, be able to give more information on that, as well as the summer literacy program. Last spring, Noelle and I met with several community partners that already have literacy programming in place for the summer. We wanted to partner with them and work with Allison as well to provide training and provide curriculum for them so that it aligns to the curriculum that we are using in the school and the procedures and the routine so students are familiar with it. And we wanted to start small. We know that going into the summer, we're going to have to expand that. So we're going to kind of start with that and then expand it out to be able to include more students. So we're just starting that work as well and be able to give more information about that as we work through that plan. And data literacy and balanced assessment, that lever, we had a cross-departmental leadership team that worked on a common data guidance that is a companion to our collaborative problem-solving process, so we can have some common language, some common definitions, some common data protocols, and actions around data across the district. We're going to be rolling that out and providing some learning around that with our building leaders during the leadership, the building leader PDs that we are starting to have on Tuesdays. We have a state platform called Student Success that helps us monitor student progress in our FAST and K-3 interventions and progress monitoring. That's new. That's another new technology and platform for our teachers. So there is an area that we really are targeting in helping our teachers get those interventions listed in there for the students and tracking and getting into a cadence of progress monitoring. Tom mentioned that's been like hit or miss. Coming in and out of hybrid, some of the other are coming in and out of virtual, and then just learning the system and how to input the data and how to give those assessments. But we feel like really now we're really there's some schools that have really already started that cadence, and then we're supporting other schools to get started on that. So that's an action that we really feel as part of the MTSS work that we're doing that we can support schools in that will improve student outcomes. And then just supporting that use of data and problem solving to apply effective and appropriate interventions for students and being able to support that work as well. So there is definitely an increase in the amount of support students are getting now, and a lot of that's up and running. So just helping with that and supporting that and removing barriers where they exist.
Good evening.
Good evening, board members. Can you hear? We have AJ with us this evening. Can you all hear him?
What is the purpose of monitoring?
Improve student outcomes.
Say that again?
To improve student outcomes.
And so we certainly hope that as a result of it, we'll have created more alignment throughout the organization, which ultimately helps us improve outcomes for students. What's the purpose of monitoring?
To determine if the district's meeting board policy.
Yeah, to get a sense of to what extent is district performance in reality matching board expectation in policy. So the board has said, this is what we want to see for our students, and monitoring is opportunity for you to figure out, are we actually getting there? And to what extent is that happening? Anyone else? What's the purpose of monitoring? Any other thoughts?
I guess to measure progress towards goal.
Yeah, absolutely. This is progress monitoring. And it has to be monitored towards something specifically. If there isn't a predefined expectation, then it's not actually monitoring. And so the fact that you've created goals and now you're looking, have we made progress toward that goal? All right, what is monitoring not? So there's often things that boards get off into that aren't actually monitoring. What are some examples of things that monitoring isn't about?
Maybe inputs?
Yeah, so it's not about getting the board's agreement on or sign off on the various inputs or the strategies. This isn't about the board deciding we like the work that the adults are doing and we dislike the work the adults are doing. It's not about inputs at all. It's actually about what are the ultimate results we want and what progress are we making toward those results. How that's being accomplished is not the key focus of monitoring. Yeah, so it's not about the inputs. Any other thoughts? What is monitoring not about?
AJ, before we go further with that, I should stop and pause and let those who are watching know what's going on right now, because they're probably thinking, what is this all about? So they're probably saying he just jumped into our meeting. So this is AJ Carville. He works with the Council of Great City Schools, and he also coaches our board. And so what we are doing right now is having a live coaching session. As a board, we want to improve on the way in which we do monitoring and as we guide Tom and his team. So that's what you're seeing right now. So thank you, AJ, for joining us. Now we can continue.
I should mention I am not, in fact, a Zoom bomber. Thank you for that clarification. Any other reflections? What is monitoring not about?
You know, it's not about offering advice either to Tom and his team. Like, we're not offering the advice during that time. So monitoring is not that.
Yeah. This isn't the opportunity to say, hey, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about doing this? That's not what monitoring is.
Yeah, I was just going to offer probably just a spin off of what Kim said. It's really not about the means work, it's about the ends work.
Yeah. Are our children getting the education? Are they receiving the justice owed to them by the school system? That's what this is about. And how folks are trying to accomplish that, that's a different story. This is about, are we actually accomplishing that? So as you reflect on the presentation that you were just offered, if the intention of monitoring is to get a sense of the extent to which reality for children matches the expectations by the board, to what extent do you have a stronger understanding? Share something with me that you now understand about whether or not you're closer. What understanding do you have about the extent to which the board performance for students matches the expectations for the board?
I understand that our students are not on pace to meet the goal that we've set forth.
Yeah. So one thing that came across in the presentation is the students we're not currently on pace to achieve the goal, that the expectations we have are not currently being matched by the reality our children are experiencing. Got it. Anyone else? What do you now understand about the relationship between reality and policy as a result of the presentation?
I understand that there is a plan to get us to where we need to be. So there has been some thoughts given on what needs to happen to get us to the point to where we need to be.
Yeah, there's been some planning, some thoughtfulness. Anyone else? All right, so let's run through the basics right quick. So I've offered you a progress monitoring cheat sheet, and it's broken into 3 sections: before you start monitoring, during the monitoring, and then after you've completed the monitoring. So before you ever even start the monitoring conversation, before staff gives any type of presentation, anything of that nature, my encouragement to you is to first stop and ask yourself a few really important preceding questions. The first of which is, are we clear about which policy is being monitored? That was pretty clear to me, but I just want to check just for practice sake. Which policy is being monitored at this time?
Our 3rd grade literacy goals for all students and then Black males.
Yeah, that's 411A and 411B, I believe, respectively. And that was made pretty clear, especially if you're looking at the actual monitoring report. But it was also made clear on the front page of the presentation that staff offered. Okay, so the next question is, does the data clearly show the previous 3 reporting periods, the current reporting period, and future reporting periods? So do you have that data? Is what's been provided to you, does it clearly show you the trend line of performance for your students? previous reporting periods, current reporting periods, future, kind of the goals that we're targeting. Do you have that data?
Yeah, we do. But I think it's worth noting that the superintendent has asked the board to revisit the trend for the years to come in light of the challenge of that COVID's put on everything. So, you know, dropping back.
So where do you see that trend data?
In the dashboard, the snippet of the dashboard that they put into the monitoring report, the document, not the PowerPoint.
I would add that we have the values, but we do not have a trend line.
Okay. So this board goal monitoring dashboard, goal 1, is that what you're looking at, Rob?
Yeah, the one that shows the last several percent proficient, and then the targets for instance, for winter of this year, spring of this year, and on for the next 2 years to follow.
Somebody, I missed who it was, made an observation about the presentation. Who was that?
It was Kim.
Kim.
My observation is that we have the values, but we do not have trend line.
So I generally encourage administrations to present this to their board in the form of a trend line. So while that's not like canon, it's not strictly necessary. I strongly encourage it. Any idea why I strongly encourage it?
A picture is worth 1,000 words.
Well, well said. It's just you really want monitoring to not only be transparent to board members who spend a lot of time in this data, but you really want monitoring to be transparent and accessible to your families as well, so they can really have a sense of what's happening in the lives of their children. And so having the data is useful, and probably most, if not all, of your parents will find that fairly useful. But they'll have to work a little bit harder for that than if it was a picture. And so I generally encourage that. All right, so you've got the data. The next question then is, do we have a clear understanding from the superintendent of what their evaluation of the data is, what they believe the data means? Do you have an evaluation from the superintendent of the data?
Well, are we to assume that the presenter was presenting on behalf of the superintendent? So that's the superintendent's interpretation and of the information?
Sure. Again, the harder you make your families work, the less effective monitoring is. And so forcing people to have to intuit it from a presentation is less valuable than having it clearly articulated somewhere. And so is there somewhere where the superintendent's evaluation of the data is presented for you?
That's the executive summary in the report.
So in the executive summary, so what does the superintendent say their evaluation of the district's current performance relative to 4.1.1.A? Anybody?
There's 2 bullet points. I mean, one just talks about the decrease based on previous.
So you're reading the executive summary, but that's not
Right,
actually
that's
what I'm asking.
Okay.
I'm asking, has somewhere the superintendent clearly articulated the extent to which the district is currently on track, off track, something to that degree, on target, off target, red, yellow, green, some type of status indicator that gives you a sense of the superintendent's interpretation of what does our current level of performance actually, what is our current level of performance?
The dashboard is color coded and shows a red indicator if we are off track. That is not indicated with a key, but it does in fact show up red for us.
Tom, obviously you're here. Is that reflective? Is that what that red box is intended to convey? That the district is off. I don't know what red means. Normally it means off track.
Yeah, that's what it means here too. We don't have a key there to indicate it, but that's what we've traditionally used.
All right, got it. So we have the so they're embedded in the data. There's a red box. What I would encourage is actually at the top of the Word document that is the monitoring report. It says policy, interpretation, goal, data dashboard, but up and all the way to the right at the top, it says evaluation. Ideally right there, so that it is front and center, would be an indicator that there would be a red box there or something of that nature, or the words off track or something there. So that again, you don't want your families to have to work to interpret this. The board, you are at an extreme advantage in that you just live inside of this data so often. But you want to think about your monitoring reports from the perspective of your family, who are very capable, but they don't live in this all day, every day. And so you don't want to make them work for it. And so instead of having it merely embedded in the data, I'd also just make it more plain by having it articulated in some way up there where it says evaluation at the top of the page. Are people seeing that on the actual Word document monitoring report? All right, so that's the next step, is to what extent is the superintendent's evaluation present? Out of curiosity, why is it important that the superintendent be very explicit about their evaluation of the current level of performance relative to the board's expectation? Why is that important to hear that from the superintendent?
What's the basis? Monitoring is the basis for superintendent evaluation. So having clarity around this translates to performance, his performance.
So it creates clarity around what is our current level of performance, and it is part of a larger evaluative framework on an annual basis. Who else? Why is it important for the superintendent to share his evaluation of where the district is presently?
Transparency for not only the board, but also parents, community members, etc.
Yeah. Makes it transparent, easy to see, people can understand. Any other reflections on why this is important? So a few ideas here, in addition to the ones that have been offered. Part of the work of monitoring the district, the board monitoring the district publicly, is that you create a culture around progress monitoring within the school system, that it's absolutely safe and appropriate to have honest conversations about where our students are. That's not something to be hidden. That's not something to be obfuscated. That we're always open and upfront and transparent. In the same way that you would want your principals to be about their schools and their teachers to be about their classrooms. And so you model that. So part of that is just modeling the culture of transparency around student performance. This is not an opportunity to beat up on the superintendent or anybody else. It's an opportunity to just be very clear about where we at. And inside of that, have sober conversations about, okay, so now we know where we are, and we are where we are. So then what's the next step? And then what's the next step after that? And what's the next step? But this is really a critical part of your cultural development. If you hide from truth about students in the boardroom, you give permission to staff to hide from truth about students in the classroom. Board behavior matters. All right, and so then the final question is there some supporting documentation? And obviously you all have a bevy of supporting documentation from the superintendent. So then next, what I would encourage your board chair to do is to lead a conversation. And I would encourage your board chair to do this prior to any presentation from the staff. So I recommend that she first get those same clarifications I just asked. Hey, do we know which one's being monitored? Do we have the data? Is it past, present, future? Do we see, the evaluation? Do we see documentation? I'd encourage this board chair to ask those 4 questions first. And then as soon as she has clarity that all 4 of those are true, then I'd encourage her to move on to the next stage. Again, prior to any presentation from the superintendent. And because remember, this monitoring, it's really valuable for this to be a conversation between the board and the superintendent. This isn't actually a conversation between the board and the public, or the superintendent and the public. It's not even a conversation between the board and the staff. This is really a conversation between the board and their employee. And so I would encourage you to move directly into the conversation, and then hold the presentation for after the conversation if it helps contextualize or fill in the blanks left behind by the conversation. And that then is a really good use of the board's time. It's like, got you. So we missed this and this. Thank you for having that presentation for us. But that I would front load the conversation, back load the presentation. So to move into the conversation, I would encourage you all to start asking a series of questions about the data that you've read or the presentation you heard. And the first questions I'd encourage you to get curious about are, who exactly is the data talking about? So based on the presentation you saw, or the data that's in the dashboard, or the data that's in the monitoring report, what questions do you have about which students we're talking about? What questions do you have? And feel free to ask them of your superintendent. So one example of a who question to ask is, and so Tom, do you have a sense of, are there any groups of students that seem to be struggling more than other groups of students? Like who seems to be struggling the most as we're looking at literacy? Is there any way to really zoom in on a particular group of students whose needs are being particularly unmet during this whole pandemic situation?
Tom, you're muted.
Sorry about that. First, it's clear that all students are suffering to one extent or the other. We've just really lost ground, but our ELL students and our special education students and our Black male students, I would point out as particular challenges.
Gotcha. Other questions, board members, you have to get to who the data is talking about?
So AJ, if I could interject in that question, and maybe I'm missing it because it's not easily, like it's not a visual thing that's stepping out into this report, but I know in the PowerPoint presentation, there was a slide around identifying the students by race, 3rd grade demographic breakdown. And I believe then that was to reflect 3rd grade reading scores or the FAST assessment, but it's not in this report. So I don't know how in this report I would, if I just looked at this report, I don't know that I could pull that out. I mean, there is a little bit in the analysis and interpretation. It's just not readily accessible in the report that I'm seeing. Again, unless it's someplace that it's just not stepping out to me.
So what question about which students are being impacted? What is the who related questions you have for your superintendent?
So I think it's just who's struggling and how would I know which groups are struggling based on if I'm just looking at this report.
Tom?
Yeah, well, we don't have that highlighted in the actual text of the report. However, there is a link to the dashboard, the data dashboard, that I believe makes all of that, any number of ways to dissect that data. But certainly
by going there, you can disaggregate the data, is what you're saying.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can access that. But if I know that Kim and I can't remember all who worked with Kim had a proposed a format, and we have some possible additions to that. But as a presentation vehicle, but I think that deciding what it is that we want actually presented in the reports is probably even more important than that. We've had the feedback in the past that there was too much, and so we've tried to make it succinct, but if we don't have the right stuff in there, then we need to adjust that.
Other who questions you have, questions that really get at which students are the data talking about, or any questions about who is being impacted or not impacted. What who related questions do you have, board members? The intention right now is to get really clear understanding of the data, and so we're just going to ask questions to help us understand it, and then after we better understand it, then we'll start asking questions to help make meaning of what happens next. But first, any other who questions?
I would also then lift up who's doing well, like who's maybe exceeded expectations.
Yeah, are we seeing any groups of students who are doing particularly well in this virtual environment?
I would not say that any group is doing particularly well, if that was intended to be answered right now.
Yeah, nationwide, this has largely been not only a healthcare disaster, but an educational disaster. And many school systems are finding students have lost ground. The only groups of students that I've seen nationwide that seem to be doing somewhat better than their peers tends to be students who are already significantly advanced anyway. And so it's not unusual to see students who were taking AP courses, for example, to continue to be succeeding in their studies. But in general, what Tom described is what I've observed as well, is that for the most part, this is not working out for students at all. Any other who questions before we transition to a different layer? Any other questions about who's being impacted as you're looking at the data that's been presented to you, and you really want to spend time looking at the data and getting a sense? Is there any other questions I have about this data that's being presented? Any other who questions? Which students we're talking about? And the next layer of questions, and you can always keep coming back to who questions if you want. The next layer of questions I'd encourage you to dig into is, as you're looking at the data, what are the circumstances surrounding the data for our students? So we get a sense of who is struggling or who's excelling, and what are some of the circumstances surrounding the data or surrounding the students that's causing that? What questions do you have for your superintendent related to what? You ask some who questions, now maybe some what questions. Which circumstances, what's currently happening, what are strengths, weaknesses, limitations? Any questions in that genre? Those questions about your superintendent to get an understanding of what is happening that's giving rise to this data.
On the slide regarding lever 2 and the access to grade level expectations, I believe it was the first bullet item mentioned appropriate identification of special ed students and additional resources. Am I misunderstanding that we felt that we were not appropriately identifying prior to this, or are we doing something differently to identify in order to provide grade level access for those groups?
Yeah, so we're trying to be through an anti-racism lens, being hypercritical of how it is that we apply labels, I guess, for lack of a better term, to students, because there's a tendency, broadly speaking, and other districts have certainly struggled with this more than we have, but a disproportionate number of one particular demographic group being identified for special education services, for instance. So that can be a challenge with language learners, where a struggle with language is actually misidentified and it's identified as a learning disability. That's a notoriously difficult one to wrestle with. Or another frequent challenge is with one of the groups we're talking specifically about tonight, which is Black males, because they tend to be over-identified for special education. And what we're determined to do is to ensure that before we apply a label, that we're actually providing all of our students with the actual opportunity to access grade level instruction so they can demonstrate where, what their capacity actually is. So I think that was just more broadly speaking how we're trying to integrate our work. But the other piece of that too, Kim, is our EL curriculum, and ensuring that the curriculum that we have, that we're providing district-wide is appropriate and connected culturally to all of the students that we have. So we're not inadvertently preventing access because of the materials that we're introducing instruction with. And I don't know if Noelle or Kelly have something to flesh that out in a little more detail.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at, Kim, is that first bullet point, kind of what is the action, and clearly stating it's just looking at the processes to ensure that they're equitable, right? So like, what is the consistent process for a student to be identified into gifted and talented, and is it consistent? So we're not necessarily saying that the processes aren't valid and used correctly, but our data is giving us some indicators that we need to check that. So when we look at and this, they'll get into more of this when we talk about algebra, but like math pathways, right? And what some of these identifications do to as barriers to students to get to the courses that they need. So we would just want to look at those systems to ensure that students are, if they need the supports and they need those services, or they should qualify, that they are getting them, but that our processes for doing that are consistent and that they're not a barrier for students to get grade level instruction. Does that answer?
It does. I think where the question came from was when we were saying access to grade level expectations, and then identifying perhaps special ed and EL, we should still be providing grade level instruction and standards, just with various required interventions or assistance based on that identification, or whatever their IEP says or their 504 says, or
yeah, appropriately. Yes. Yeah.
We are providing that grade level opportunity. We just need to make sure that the identification process of either the special education or EL or GT is happening consistently across the board.
And that we're not over-identifying or under-identifying. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
But all those supports would be in addition to their core instruction, or to support and enhance their core instruction.
So one of the things I really enjoyed about that exchange was that you asked your superintendent a question, he answered the question, and then like a good quarterback, threw the ball to his wide receiver, to fill in some details. And that's exactly how great monitoring conversations happen. So well done on that. The floor is still open. What other questions that, as you look at the data, and as I'm looking at the data in the monitoring report, there's some very significant kind of what or why type questions that jump out at me. And so whenever you get these monitoring reports, you want to look at that and say, okay, what are the big questions that are jumping out? And so this is your time. You have questions about what, questions about why is the data the way the data is? I'm seeing this particular trend in the data. Why is that, or what occurred, that is causing that? What other questions do you have that help get at the what or the why of the data being the way it is? What questions do you have? There's some pretty significant questions that jump out as I'm looking at the data right here on my. What questions jump out for you? The questions about what am I seeing here in the data, or why is the data, what's your belief about why the data is the way it is? What questions do you have?
I guess I'll have a question to ask here, which is looking at the kindergarten data and seeing the 20 percentage point difference between this cohort of kindergartners versus the last cohort of kindergartners. What do we learn there, knowing that these are kids who are
yes
2.5 months into their DMPS career, possibly unless they had preschool, and what's that tell us for the next couple of years?
That was one of the very glaring questions that jumped out at me as well. So folks, keep looking, because there are several other questions that are just as kind of big wonderings for me as well as the one that Rob lifted up. Tom?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and one that we've been wrestling with. As you know, we had a pretty significant drop in our anticipated kindergarten enrollment this fall, and we're still, kind of in the process of figuring that out. But I think part of it has to do with perhaps students that normally would have been in this mix that were not in the mix for COVID related reasons. So the comparison group is we think pretty significantly different. But I think probably more important is that those first weeks of instruction in kindergarten for early literacy are just, hugely important. And that was severely compromised this fall for, I think for fairly obvious reasons. It's more difficult for the kindergarten students to engage virtually. It's more difficult for the teachers to do what they know best to do when they're trying to do that virtually. And then when we were in hybrid, which was for a period of weeks, they had half the amount of time in in-person instruction. So their modality shifted once each week. And so I just think we lost a lot of in-person time that was crucial for those early literacy skills.
Great question. Other what or why questions as you're looking at the data? There's a few other whoppers that kind of jump out, out of the data as you're looking at it. And staff, by the way, since we're doing a practice session, if you've got some big what, why questions that you want to ask and then turn around and you all could answer, just to kind of help see the conversation, feel free to jump in.
So I don't know, AJ, if this is the kind of question that you're interested in us asking. This is just me being inquisitive. So I want to go back to the same cohort data. And I think that Kelly indicated when we get to second and third grade, the plus 1% and the plus 3% is really reflective of the interventions that have taken place in the previous years that allow us then to make those gains. So I think my question is, absent COVID, because that seems to be sort of the X factor overlying all of this data, but absent COVID, would we have expected those gains to be even higher? Or is that a trend that we anticipated or expected otherwise?
We would have expected it to be significantly higher. Good question.
To what extent, Tom? Can you give me a sense of what that higher would have been?
Well, we would have expected at least to be, I would have expected to at least a bit the target goal, the incremental target goal for the fall. So which you see at the immediately above the red boxes there.
Okay.
That's what
So-
that's the trend that we seemed to have been on through the first 3 quarters of last year. So absent COVID, that's what I would have expected. I don't know if Noelle and Kelly have a different take on that. We didn't talk about that particular question.
No, I agree. We would have expected, we can't guarantee, but we would have expected in 3rd grade to meet both of our targets for those 2 groups of students around those board goals. We may not have expected the gains to be more than what they are, or, but I definitely feel like we would have met the target in the spring and then again in the fall.
A question I have, and I'm going to ask the question with no real answer. I'm wondering why, when we look at cohort data from 2nd to 3rd grade, our Black males are actually faring a little bit better than all students. So what's happening that's benefiting Black males more significantly that could be duplicated in other areas?
And the actual answer is probably, we don't know, but we're definitely examining that. Tom, unless you do have.
No, I don't. No, I don't have a good explanation for that.
Yeah, there's definitely been some aberrant data nationwide, and I don't know if this falls into that bucket or not. I know we had some districts do assessment in the spring that was all online and got some very unreliable data back from it. And so it's hard to know if this is a data reliability issue or a real opportunity issue. And I think you all would have to do some real hunting into the data to ascertain that. And by the way, folks, board members, that is a very fair game set of questions to ask. Is when you're asking some of these what and why questions to get a better understanding of the data, to really dig into the data integrity issues, questions you have, data reliability questions you have, because that is a real issue nationwide with students doing online assessment. It's hard to know, if I'm a 3rd grader, is my 5th grade brother, helping me out a little bit? Not trying to be scandalous or anything, but just trying to be a good big brother. But until you ask, and so it's hard to know, is that a data irregularity or is there a real opportunity here? I think you'd have to investigate that. But I really enjoy that as a question that helps understand the data. Anyone else? Questions about the what or the why? One large question I saw, the one Terry pointed out, is kind of we're hoping the trend is going up. But another why question that I think jumps out of the data is we saw several areas where it had been going up, and then last fall we saw dips in several areas. Do we have some insight into why we saw dips in those areas last fall? Obviously, this was even before the pandemic. We've got a number of areas that have been going really strong over a 3-year trajectory, but a few areas, I think particularly in 1st and 2nd grade maybe, where we actually saw dips last fall. Do we have a sense of why that is?
Yes, but I think Kelly is best at explaining that one.
Yeah, I think if you're speaking of the kindergarten to 1st grade dip that we saw, I think it was last fall. We tend to lose ground over the summer or slide back more than we should from K to 1. And that year in particular, we were implementing some new phonics curriculum, also supporting some schools in their use of OG. And I'm feeling the pace, we didn't stay on pace and didn't get to, like I spoke in the presentation about the need to really get to where you're practicing that automaticity at the end of all the skills you've learned. And because we didn't stay on pace with that, it didn't allow for that at the end. That's our thought around that, of why that happened, in because some schools took quite a bit of dip because they didn't stay on pace. So they didn't get all their grade level instruction in until the very end and didn't have that time for practice. We would have to play that out to see, like it's some discussion and some thought that we had around that.
Board members, any other who, what, or why questions on the data that you've been presented before we transition? Any other who, what, or why questions that are kind of burning up for you?
So the one question
Mr. Cody, I didn't know if you had any that you want to jump in.
Most of my questions were taken care of during the email exchanges. I'm waiting for a couple technical ones and don't know where to put them.
Cool. And then after you've asked a lot of who, what, and why questions, where the intention is to really get a deeper understanding of the data and really understanding, getting clarity around what are some of the aberrant aspects of it, then finally we'd ask how questions. And how questions really are future looking, where who, what, and why questions are really, retrospective. The how questions are really looking forward. Like how are you going to respond to the data as we now understand it? And some of that how you've already heard, but just for practice sake, board members, what how type of questions do you have related to this particular monitoring report? How, which changes will happen based on this data, or, how are you responding to the data, or maybe even, Duana, I'll have you ask this just so you can practice. How can we as a board support changes that need to happen, or how will this impact decisions that are brought before the board, over the next 9-12 months? So hold on to those, Duana. I'll come back to you. Board members, any other how questions about the board's the administration's response to the data as you now understand it? And remember the cheat sheet I sent you, there's a few example questions there. Feel free to pull one of those or ask your own.
So EJ, my question has been, in the report, there is a section on response to data, priority actions, evidence of implementation, and it does talk about the levers. So I just still am struggling with how these interventions are going to improve reading scores for our kids.
Gotcha. Let's be real specific to make this practice round easier. What's one specific thing that you have a how question about?
So how will PD for leaders and coaches increase reading scores for kids?
The basic premise of that is, especially as we're learning to navigate a new environment, is ensuring that our building leaders are spending time the way that we would have expected them to be spending time when we were in person, in how they're monitoring what's happening in their various classrooms, and then strategically using their coaching, their instructional coaches to specifically address challenges that have been discovered. So we were thrown a bit off kilter. Everybody was, as we tried to start the year virtually, then shift to hybrid, and then we're returning to virtual. So we're kind of getting our legs underneath us, but ensuring that in this virtual environment, that those already pretty well entrenched skill sets are being translated successfully into effectively supporting teachers in the virtual environment. And we have some evidence that that's happening to a degree, but it's something that we need to make sure is happening universally, building by building, classroom to classroom.
So just to add to that, Kelly, the adoption of a new curriculum, for example, is the research is very clear that we can talk about race, we can talk about bias, we can talk about all these things. If we don't build teachers and leaders' capacity to teach reading based on science, nothing changes for kids. So the adoption of our new curriculum is one of our levers, access to high quality curriculum. We adopted something that is grounded in the science of teaching reading. And so that is what we are training and supporting people on implementing, because doing what we've always done is not going to get a different result. So that particular lever, coupled with access to grade level expectations, which is also supported by that adopted curriculum, we have high level of confidence that will impact reading achievement.
And will we expect at the next FAST assessment, which is sometime in the winter, that we will identify or we'll be able to see how this professional development and curriculum will improve test scores? Do you think that we can expect that?
We do expect that there will be gains in the winter testing period from fall to winter versus spring to fall, because of, just because we've had more consistent contact with students and we've had more instructional time. Now, being able to draw a direct line between that action, the professional development, and the scores is over this period of time is we can't prove that, but we do know, we have identified where some of the weaknesses in the system are, and we're addressing those directly. If we see what we're hoping to see, with a closing of the gap that we see fall to fall now, and have that not be as broad winter to winter, we can't say that all of that is due to that professional development, but we certainly have reason to believe that it will impact it.
And then finally, and normally there's a bunch of other how questions, and so they'd be asked, but just to move on with this practice. Duana, did you have a how question for the superintendent?
And I did have this question. So how can the board continue to be of support in this work?
What are you going to need from your board over the next 6, 9, 12 months?
That's a really good question. One that's been a struggle. What we need the most, the board has unfortunately little power to impact. That we've talked about that ad nauseum. I think one of the things that we do need, I think, from the board is, our teachers and our leaders are very invested in the success of our students, and nobody is satisfied with the data that we have right now. But I can assure everyone it's not from a lack of planning or a lack of effort, and that the data that we're seeing is not unique to Des Moines. And for the board to understand that, we do have a lot of staff that listen to these meetings, and what the board says, as AJ said, what board members say does matter. So as much encouraging, as much encouragement as our staff can receive, not just from me and from the leadership team, but also from our board, and to acknowledge the hugely different environment that obviously our students and families are operating in, but have also dramatically impacted staff, their sense of efficacy when they're trying to do things in a very different environment, one that they didn't anticipate, and certainly one that they hadn't, spent their educational pursuits trying to master. we've asked an awful lot of everybody, and it can be really discouraging to not see the results that we all want to see. So that, as you know, as much as the efforts of everyone involved can be appreciated and recognized, and I think that's probably the single biggest thing, because this has been for a whole host of reasons, this has been a disheartening experience for all of us, the board included, for sure. But we need to, like I've been preaching to the team, the last starting a few weeks prior to Thanksgiving. It's like, okay, so we've battled the trying to get everybody connected. We have a device in everyone's hands. We've done a lot of PD on how to be most effective in the virtual environment. It's not perfect by any stretch, but we're doing way better than our colleagues around the state in that regard. So now we really just need to set all of that aside. The mitigation strategies are becoming routinized and don't feel they feel awkward, I'm sure, still, but they're feeling more automatic. We really need to focus on instruction and get back to basics, and that's what we're really trying to do. And so in a discussion that we had earlier today, we have a real sense of confidence that buildings really have their building leadership teams and staff really have their legs under them now. And we are starting to see some of those structures that we did have in place in person actually playing out in the virtual environment, and we're looking for ways now to say, okay, so what are the particular barriers now as a system that we can implement? Maybe we have to be tighter on some things. Maybe we do have to limit how many different platforms teachers are expecting families to operate in. We have Canvas. Should we be utilizing Canvas more exclusively? At the exclusion of a variety of other useful tools that while in the best of times might provide utility in this environment, actually maybe create more confusion. So we may have to tighten up on some things as a system that typically we don't, in an effort to give our teachers as much flexibility as possible. But knowing that we're in this environment that is new to everyone, we probably need to do some narrowing of what vehicles we're using to deliver instruction, so as to keep everybody as engaged as possible. So we have some efforts like that in place, are working on getting some of those things in place, in addition to some live support for students that really need that. Not that it would be person-to-person instruction, but a place at schools that students can come in when they really can't be successful at home for whatever reason, where they can have some adult contact and be in the school environment, because we think that will help as well. But I think that's the biggest thing is the board demonstrating to our staff that they really do appreciate the challenges that they've taken on, and recognizing the tremendous effort, even though at this point in time, it's not yielding the student results yet that we expect to see.
It doesn't sound like at the moment that there's a lot that your superintendent feels like you all can do, other than continuing to just be incredibly supportive of your teachers, especially in really difficult times. And so I certainly join him in not underestimating. Thank you, for folks who are working hard and giving their all. It goes a long way. And so after the board has asked who, what, why, how questions, then at that point, Dwana, as board chair, you might ask the superintendent, hey, is there any part of your presentation that we didn't cover, that you have a slide or two or three that you really wanted to dive into that we missed? And then the superintendent would either do that or not do that. And then at that point, now as a board, you've really gone through the monitoring process and you're ready to ask yourselves, are we prepared to accept this report? Do we feel like it gives us a clear and accurate understanding of the extent to which reality for our students matches the expectations in our policy. And so at this point, as a board chair, you nudge folks to ascertain, are you ready to consider this particular monitoring report? Madam Chair, I'll let you take over here.
Okay, I believe that all questions have been asked, so are we ready to move forward with a motion to approve? And I'm actually going to put both of these together since they were presented together. So if we are ready, do I have a motion for E2 and E3?
You know, I actually do have two more quick questions that I wasn't able to slide in there.
Go ahead, Mr. C.
Yeah, these should be easy, but just could somebody remind me when the testing window was, like date wise?
Yeah, it was, so it opened early September, so about a week after the students got back in, and it was open for 3 weeks after that. So it closed at the end of September. So the data that you're looking at, actually, much of it was taken before students had a lot of instruction.
Okay. And then my next question was on one of the last slides on your action steps. It talked about, I lost the specific wording, but it said to action fast. It was professional development for leaders, I guess it was. Is that to say that you're training people how to take action on this data?
Yes, part of that data process is looking like what are we looking at, and kind of just similar to the conversations we just had, like what's it telling you, what are you worrying about, like going through that problem solving process, but then also not stopping there, which we have previously, like what are appropriate actions for this data. So we started that work last year, and we want to continue that not just for K3, but we're actually have a plan to do that K8 so that we're able to apply those interventions and those actions to students that are having reading difficulties up through 8th grade.
Okay, right on. Yeah, I presume that's what you meant, but just, I don't know, I was having a hard time reading the wording on it.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't make that clear.
Okay, do we have may I have a motion and a second to approve item E2 and E3?
I move that the board accept the monitoring reports presented by the superintendent.
A second, Cody.
We have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Mr. Cody. Please take the vote.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
No.
Mr. Cody?
Yes.
Ms. Martirano?
No.
Ms. Sawyer?
No.
We have a 3-3 vote.
Motion fails.
So the motion fails.
So in these situations, what the board is doing is deciding whether or not, that it accepts the monitoring report by the superintendent. So in a situation like this, two things. One, if you find it particularly unacceptable, very helpful to bring that issue forward in advance of voting on whether or not you want to accept the monitoring report, and really highlight some of what it is that has you not really in a position to accept the report. Is it that it doesn't adequately reveal the reality of where the district is relative to where the board's expectations are? Is that the rationale? I suspect sometimes the rationale may be along the lines of you're uncomfortable with the how the administration has offered to respond to the data. Whatever your rationale is for being unready to accept the monitoring report, it's really, really helpful to bring that forward while we're still in the conversation phase, preferably in the form of some of the questions that were asked. And so I realize we're slightly out of order at this moment, but we're still in a training phase. And so what is some of the unreadiness that exists for you that has this report not yet being acceptable for you?
So I'd be happy to go. This is Terry. And I think probably the place where I felt the most unready was in the response to the data and the fact that it appeared that there were so many things that were being applied in response that I didn't get a sense that there was a specific prioritization of those things that would give me a sense that there was a clear path forward with regard to the things that we intended to implement immediately to help move or accelerate moving the needle. So it was sort of like, let's throw everything out there and let's see what sticks. That's sort of what I felt. And I didn't feel convinced that there was a clear path towards a prioritization of those things that needed to happen in order to accelerate movement towards goal and to really begin to focus on those underperforming groups in a way that gave me confidence that we were going to be able to make a change in the short term.
Gotcha. So my only coaching for you is when you all are still in the conversation and we get to, and your board chair asks for how related questions, what the way I'd probably approach it is like, you know, Tom, as I'm listening to this, I'm hearing a whole lot of different strategies, but I'm not getting how they coalesce into a coherent focus. Tom, how will you deploy these in a really focused and intentional way? And give your superintendent an opportunity to respond to that. So that's and that may not actually have an impact on how you ultimately vote, but it will help bring that conversation into the conversation, which I think, Terry, is a really, really important thing to lift up in monitoring. Like that right there is a large part of the value of monitoring, is to be future focused. And so I would just encourage you to find a way to whatever that concern you have is, find a way to bring it into the conversation. Before we lose it, anybody else want to jump in and share kind of what your unreadiness is about?
No, I would echo what Terry had said. It was really in the how mode of how do we know those are going to be the action steps that are going to get us to success with our kids. And I didn't feel confident because they're just these blanket statements that, again, if I'm just anybody, not a board member who's working this or volunteering in this role that gets to see this information on a regular basis, if I were to pull this report out, I would have no idea how the how is going to get me to meeting our goals. And so, and I'm glad we're doing this now, just because it does help if we bring that into the conversation. Then we wouldn't have a vote such as what we just had.
You know, one other thing I would offer as well, especially when Dewana asked the question with regard to how the board can be of support and assistance. You know, one of the things that I think would have helped to clarify the prioritization of the response to the data as well is how we utilize and inform this information relative to our budget. We've got budget coming up, and if in fact we want to move the needle, how do we prioritize the response to the data and the implementation steps in a way that helps us to fund the things that are going to make a difference when it comes to student outcomes and student achievement?
Yeah, I really want to co-sign on this one, Tom and team, is that a very normal way for a superintendent to use part of this conversation is to reveal what are some of the reprioritization of resources, both human and financial, that you're going to need to come back to the board. Is there a significant budget amendment that you're going to need the board to consider in order to migrate funds from one bucket into a different bucket? Should they expect something significant in the next budget brought forward for the next fiscal year? Are there significant staffing realignments that, for whatever reason, will necessitate a vote of the board? And so when we get to that part of the conversation where somebody asks, hey, how can the board help with this? That is a great opportunity to have thought through, yeah, you know what, 6 months from now, we're going to need a courageous vote from the board. And this is what that's probably going to have to look like. Like, we're not there yet. We don't have a proposal for you. But looking at the handwriting on the wall as your superintendent, I can pretty much guarantee you we haven't put enough resources in this bucket. We're going to have to pull some from a few other places and put that there. And that's going to be a tough conversation. We're going to need you all to be able to be ready to make a tough call on that. That's a great opportunity to step in and just give that as an indicator for the board of where this thing's going and what support you'll need from on that front. Anyone else want to talk about unreadiness?
AJ, I see a couple of people. I think Rob has his hand up, and Noelle, she had her hand up too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, just on the funding point, I agree that it's a worthwhile conversation, but that doesn't actually do anything this academic year. Like saying that, oh, listen, I want to see how this is going to impact the budget, doesn't change a thing for a kid until optimistically the data that we get 12 months from now. So I feel like that's not, just knowing this board, I don't feel like that's an appropriate response for the district to come back and say, well, you know, we're going to, plus they've already been doing that, right? The last couple of years, we've been putting more resources or protecting the resources that we have in early literacy. So I just want to push back on that one in terms of, yeah, it's a great conversation and it's a conversation, it's a place we need to live, but I don't think the board that I've been experiencing the last 7 years would have been satisfied with that as an appropriate response.
Can I just very quickly respond by saying, I do think though, Rob, that it contextualizes the response to the data, the research in support of Black males and all of the things that are enumerated there, as well as all of the additional action steps in the action plan. I think understanding how they correlate back to what we're funding and how we're funding it is to me an important point that needs to not only be made, but understood. So I'm not trying to argue the point. I'm just trying to help you understand the context in which I raised the issue.
Noelle, I seen your hand up.
Yeah, I just have a clarifying question since this is a coaching session. Having been part of previous years of training around what this process should look like, one of the things that we've been coached on, or I think, is to not focus too much of our energy and conversations on inputs, that this is a conversation about outputs. So Kelly, to your concern, and I think maybe it was Terry, about not feeling like our response, that there's a clear plan for how that will move the needle. We intentionally keep it high level to avoid spending too much time in the inputs. So AJ, any coaching you would have for us on to what level of granularity, we have pages and pages of detailed action plans that we don't want to bore you all with, but they are very intentional and well thought out. So how do we strike that balance of not getting too far in the weeds with the board, who's not really focused on inputs, but inspiring confidence that we do actually have a pretty focused response?
That is a fabulous pushback. Kim, somebody want to jump in? Have thoughts about what does that balance look like for you? I can't remember who the other person was who wasn't feeling ready yet. Well, what's that balance look like for you? The balance between I need enough information to feel confident that there is a legitimate response, but it can't devolve into I'm trying to approve individual action plans. Like, what's the balance look like for you? It's a really very appropriate question.
And I'll for me, what I would bring up is, I think just showing the science, maybe it's showing the science behind it, right? Like the PD plan for leaders and coaches, when you explain it, it looks very different than what's on a piece of paper. Like I would be going, what's a PD plan for leaders and coaches going to do directly for kids? You know, and your PK and high school adoption process started. That's in the report. I'm like, I would have no idea what that even means and how does that relate. But, you know, sometimes you can say, you talked, I think, I don't know if it was Kelly or Tom, somebody had talked about, or Noelle, somebody talked about science behind the curriculum, I think. And, you know, so for me, it's like showing what that correlation between whatever this item is, what can you tie with the correlation to say, we believe we'll get the outcome because, right? Whether it's evidence-based interventions or whatever that is. But how it's written in this report, I would have no way of knowing what that even means, outcomes for our kids.
So I would offer two reflections on that for the two of you again, and I really appreciate this conversation. So one way that a board would want to know, and this is hard, this is really, what I'm going to say is really, really, really hard because it requires board members to behave responsibly. And the temptation is always to be irresponsible with what I'm about to describe. So one way that it's helpful for the board to have comfort is just to know that there is, in fact, a plan, and that plan has some type of implementation timeline and some type of implementation fidelity evaluation built into it. And so knowing that there's a plan and simply asking, have you already built a plan around this that has timelines and milestones and a way for you all to measure implementation fidelity? That, I think, is a fair question. Why it's dangerous is because then board members will often want to get into, well, can I get a copy of the plan and then can I go through it and I'll have more questions for you? And that's when you get into the danger zone. But it is absolutely fair to inquire of your administration, is there a plan that you've provided to, the staff has, and, people know what the plan is, it's not hidden. Is there a plan? Does it actually have milestones and timelines that could be measured? Does it have some way of evaluating the fidelity of implementation? Those are questions that are completely fair to ask when we get into the how. You just have to be disciplined enough not to try to then go a step beyond that and try to dive into, okay, well, give me the plan, I'll look at it, and then I'll tell you if I like it or not. On the other side of the ledger, Noelle, I think one of the things that you really want to take away from her answer to this is that in your monitoring reports, it is incredibly helpful to include pointers to third-party data. And actually, I saw this happen a little bit in your PowerPoint presentation, that you referenced an article in Chicago Times. I would lean into that. I would, anytime that you can include third-party evidence that says, we didn't just pull this, out of thin air. We didn't go on, Facebook and, do a poll and people said PD sounded good. Like, here's what we're actually grounding that in. That there's this evidence, give them, and that you can give them a link to. Give them a link to, the article. Let them go read it for themselves. And say, when we're looking at this particular researcher, what they found is that when you see this, a really high leverage strategy is to do this. And so for that reason, when in this narrow situation, we're going to apply this. However, that's not generalizable to this. So here's some research that says when you see this, which is slightly different than this, that's why we're doing this. And so you're going to see a few different strategies, but they're each targeted to this very specific situation. That having that level of clarity about where the strategy is coming from and why these, particularly with a third-party source that offers some evidence as to why this is, I find really sets a lot of boards' minds at ease when they're trying to understand why these strategies as opposed to some other strategies. So board member, administrator, did those help answer that series of questions you had? So
Yeah,
this is really
I think we need to, we worked on the format of these reports with our prior trainers
Yeah.
to get them in this form. And so I feel like we've been consistent in what we've been delivering
Yeah.
per, per board request. So a lot of those things, I think everything that both Terry and Kelly addressed were eminently doable in this report. We just needed to know that
You just
that's
need
what
to know.
we want included.
Yeah, what I see happening here is that you have a board that is ready to level up. And that means that if there's going to be change, as board members take on a change in their behavior, then that's going to give rise to new needs that they didn't even know they needed. And so this is going to be a negotiation, a conversation just like this one, over the next several months as you all get in the groove of having these type of more data-rich monitoring conversations where it's really conversation forward rather than presentation forward, where it's really challenging the board members. You have an obligation to interpret the data, not just look at how the data is interpreted by your staff, but you as a board member have an obligation to do your homework and show up with questions that are specific to the data, not your opinions about what should be happening or your thoughts external to the data, but really, and Rob got us started off really well. He pulled out a specific piece of data. He said, in your report, I see this data. Help me understand what this data means. That is the type of conversation that you want to be having here. And so if you can't ground your questions in something in the report, then spend a little bit more time digging into the report. But yes, Tom, to your point, this is a slightly different style of monitoring. It's a slightly leveled up style that I get the sense that this board has reached a level of maturation that they're ready for. But yeah, it is going to be this negotiation over the next few months as the board gains muscle in this area and as the administration gains muscle.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
I just had a question with regard to how we balance our inquiry. So we are asked to submit questions in advance of the meeting so that we have the ability to maybe limit the amount of time we spend during a board meeting just responding to board member questions. So what is that sweet spot that needs to be achieved relative to questions that are asked in advance and responded to versus questions that are asked at the board table?
Yeah, this is really important, is you want to increase the amount of time in your board meetings that you spend in these type of conversations. This is the most powerful conversation you're probably going to have tonight. You've conducted other business, you're going to conduct more business. This conversation is where the money is at in terms of helping drive performance improvements for students and in terms of demonstrating the expectations and the vision that this board holds on behalf of a community for the children of Des Moines. So you want to spend your time here. So the purpose of your process of submitting questions in advance is to help reduce time everywhere else. The intent is not to reduce time in this part of the meeting. It's to ask questions in advance that you can reduce time in every other part of the meeting. And so this is the place where you want to have the conversation. If you have a 2-hour long meeting, you want to spend an hour, hour and a half, you want to spend the large bulk of it here in this conversation about what are we doing for children and what evidence do we have to demonstrate where our children are at and what should we expect to happen next. This is the most powerful conversation you're going to have every single month. And so the intention of your Q&A process is to be able to handle all the really simple questions about your other items that you do have to conduct business on, to be able to handle those as efficiently as possible to free up time for this conversation. Is that responsive to your inquiry, Terry?
Yes. So, well, yes, it is in one way, but not necessarily, because I understand your point about freeing up time so we can really focus on student outcomes and student achievement. But I also believe that the way our policy is written, we are encouraged to send in questions in advance so that they can be responded to. So are you suggesting in your response that we limit the questions that we ask offline to those things that are not related to monitoring? Is that what you're saying?
No, you can absolutely include monitoring questions in advance, if for no other reason than to give your superintendent and team some type of heads up on what to expect. And also, I would do what I heard Kalen do earlier. He said he submitted questions earlier that really of a technical nature. So if there are questions that are like, hey, what assessment was this, or what assessment date? Those aren't questions that are actually helping you understand what's happening for children. Those are just kind of technical questions. And so I appreciated that he asked those in advance, and I would continue to ask those type of questions in advance. If it is one of those who, what, when, where, how, who, what, when, how, those questions that we walked through, I would feel free to submit them in advance, if you want. But those ones aren't the ones that you're trying to submit in advance to save time on. You may submit in advance and say, hey, here's some questions I'll have. You don't need to answer these in writing in advance, just to give you a heads up of the type of things I'll be asking. But you definitely want to have the conversation here. So if you have technical questions about the monitoring report, I would definitely ask those in advance so that you can focus in on the questions that are just on that cheat sheet, the who, what, why, and how questions. And if it's outside of one of those 4 buckets, I would even if it's related to monitoring, I would definitely ask it in advance. And so,
thank you.
Kaylin, thanks for being a great role model tonight. We appreciate that. Keep it up. So, Madam Chair, it sounds like you all have gone through this round of monitoring. And I hope you all are getting a sense of when you all do this conversational approach to your monitoring and really dig into the data and get clarity around it in advance of getting clarity around what happens next, that it's going to take time, but that's healthy. That's okay. And as you practice, you'll get better at this. It'll be awkward and uncomfortable first, but you'll keep getting better. Part of my recommendation is that as you need any help, just feel free to reach out, whether it's during the board meetings like today or after the board meetings like, hey, AJ, could you look through this and give me some ideas, or even before the board meetings. Hey, I'm really curious about these 3 things, AJ, could you help me figure out how to bring these conversations into the monitoring conversation in an appropriate way? Feel free to call me. That's what I'm here for. So as always, thank you for having me.
Thank you, AJ, for being with us this evening and providing some help. I know that it helps me as we start to kind of level up, as you said, and really dig into monitoring more. So thank you for being with us this evening. And board colleagues, I would encourage you, as well as we are going through this and thinking about the things that you would like to see, that you would communicate that to Rob and I, and we can get that communicated to Tom as well. And I know you've given some things tonight, but that we continue that so that we can get this right going forward, so that Tom and his team can get things together. So I appreciate you all going through that process, and we will continue to do that as well as we want to improve upon our monitoring. So we're going to continue with our meeting. The next item on the agenda is E4, Management Limitation 2.11, Return to Learn Monitoring Update. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
Yeah, so we've followed the same format as we have in the past. Just a couple of things that I would note. We have the student supports monitoring at the very top, which doesn't look a lot different over time. Attendance and participation detail by modality is the next, and we have that split out by those students that are in 100% virtual. And then we have the hybrid students. We have an overall percentage, and then we have it broken down by in-person days versus virtual days. Obviously, that, if you'll note that the dates on that end 11/13 because of our transition. Preschool attendance by modality and student group, and then the last group is elementary attendance participation by modality and student group, and then followed by middle school and then high school. One thing that I would note is those students that are in 100% virtual, and again, this is only meaningful comparison is between the time that we were in the hybrid plan with about a third of our students in virtual, that virtual attendance in hybrid is higher pretty significantly in a lot of cases compared to virtual, and 100% virtual students have a higher overall attendance rate, mostly, not entirely. We have a gap in ELL and special education, but other than that, it's higher for those students that are in 100% virtual. So nothing particularly striking in this report from the last couple, except to say that what we're drilling down to, and we referenced this a little bit during the reading reports, is really helping our school MTSS teams really get grounded in what we want the work to normally be. And we do have, I think, most of the what I would call distractions relative to COVID kind of routinized now, and really getting back to how are we utilizing all of our entire support system to ensure that those students that are not attending, even though it's virtual attendance, how are we utilizing those resources to ensure that we've identified the barriers that are preventing engagement, preventing attendance, and actively working at eradicating those barriers, because we're at a more stable place right now. I know that can change. But while we are in this period of fully virtual, really drilling down and letting go of the uncertainty, knowing where we are right now for the period of time that we're confident about, and making sure that we're actively identifying and removing those barriers as we move forward. This isn't going away. We're going to continue to be in some different form of normal, for at least the next several months, and hopefully educators will be prioritized in the vaccination efforts, and that we'll have access to that sooner rather than later, and we can get more to closer to normal, fully in person. But we've navigated and created systems for what this current reality is, and we really need to just trust that that's in place and really focus on instruction. And as it relates to this report in particular, ensuring that all of our students actually have access. So I did reference this earlier. We are working, I've been meeting with principals individually and in pairs, and we'll continue to do that. But one of the things that we're talking about in each of those conversations is, for that particular community, for that particular building, what can we create in that community that can provide more in-school access for students, even when we're all virtual, and how are they going to go about identifying those students who most need that time in school, socially distanced, obviously, keeping everybody safe, but having at least the presence of one or two adults that can help keep them focused and ensure that they're getting right in time support with their instruction, and that they have access to nutrition and not a concern about distractions in the home or connectivity issues. So I do expect to see in future reports these numbers improving, at least as it relates to attendance. And then I don't know if there are any questions about what's in this report tonight.
Superintendent Ahart, we'll do the motion first, and then I'll open it up for.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay.
First.
May I have a motion and a second to approve item E4?
Does this require, or is it just discussion?
This one was on other, I believe, but the other monitoring reports, I believe.
Yeah, it's discussion action.
Yes, discuss.
Oh, this one's discussion. Okay. So are there any questions or discussions for this?
Discussion in action.
So we do need to make a motion.
Cody will move for approval then.
Second, Martirano.
Is there any discussion or questions?
Ms. Bradley, I do have a question, and I know this has come up before. And following the meeting where we discussed this, I received multiple emails from teachers and other district staff indicating that they would question the response that was provided around how we are capturing attendance. So if you could again remind us of the process for capturing attendance, number one. Number two, if that is just done once or if it is done multiple times throughout the day. And then third, if attendance means turning on your device versus participation. I'm struggling with characterizing attendance just as one thing when it may or may not indicate participation, engagement, or anything except turning on a device.
Well, it's not just turning on a device, and attendance would be done at the elementary level once a day, but at high school and middle school, it's done multiple times because they have interactions with multiple teachers. But it does entail at least interaction, interaction between the teacher and the student to be counted as in attendance. It's certainly not as clean, as in person when you can actually, ensure that somebody's physically there the entire time that you expect them to be, fully there. But so it's not as clean a measure as in a 100% in-person environment for sure.
I'm wondering.
Does that answer your question, Terry?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I know it's not a perfect science, nor will it ever be a way that we can truly capture participation, engagement, and learning. But I feel like for as long as we have been in this virtual mode, it's not creating an opportunity for us to have a level of certainty around what's happening, even with our most challenged students. So I just wonder if there's a different way to skin the cat, if we need to think about this a little differently, especially if we're going to be in this for a prolonged period of time. I just wonder if there's something else that we need to be doing to really capture not just, a check in the box for, attendance, but what attendance means in this context, because it's really important.
Agreed. Yep. Well, that's something that we continue to wrestle with, and it's a conversation certainly that districts are having with one another, and we'll revisit what our current process is and look for ways to improve and bring you something with more detail and hopefully an improved measure as we come back in January.
Tom, I would also lift up and echo whatever is decided upon to provide that communication to parents. Kind of oddly enough, I found out by talking to one of my daughter's teachers today, she's been missing out of classes, even though she's been there, but she's not one to talk. She's not one to raise her hands or type in the chat, but she was there. Her camera was, she didn't have her camera on because it's not required, but she was counted as absent because she wasn't participating. but she was physically in the class.
Okay.
So communication back to parents is extremely helpful as well.
Are there any other questions or discussion from my board colleagues? Okay, hearing none, please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Before I vote, I just want to point a fact. The superintendent's recommendation is that we receive the monitoring report, not that we approve the monitoring report, which is a distinction worth noting. So I vote yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson.
Yes, with the caveat that we have some clarity around how we capture attendance with the next report.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. Next are our information only items. These items are for information only, preliminary plans for various school improvement projects, and notification of award of competitive quotes. Next is items of privilege. Next on the agenda, we have items of privilege. Do any of my board colleagues have any comments to share?
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
I know that you and I have communicated, but I think it's important that the community know that our board is initiating a letter to our suburban colleagues regarding the CIML and the potential for us delaying the season until January. I don't know how many other boards have responded, but I would just offer that even if we don't get a response from others, I think that we need to proceed with that because, as we well know, our student athletes were significantly impacted during the small fall sports season, and I would hope that we might be able to give them some relief in the winter season as well. So I'd just like to make sure that we keep that work moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell Johnson, for bringing that up. And yes, we have reached out to the other surrounding districts right now, hearing back from one. And I believe the plan would be for us to still send that letter, even if it's us going alone, that we would be doing that. So we will continue to work on that this week. And my plan going forward is to reach out to the surrounding districts that have received that letter to get an update from them.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes. I would also just like to read just a very short statement. With passing DMTRS, we received some input from those, and so I just wanted to read this. DMPS values those who have dedicated all or a portion of their professional lives to us. You serve the students of our district daily, and that does not go unnoticed. As this board passed the retirement incentive for both DMTRS and IPERS, teachers and administrators earlier tonight, we know that it does not make those in DMTRS equal to those in IPERS. I hope you view this offer as recognition of this. For those of you who do not qualify for this incentive, know that this board is committed to working with DMPS leadership, your DMTRS advisory committee, and DMEA to lessen the gap between the two plans. Know that your dedicated service does not go unnoticed, and we will work together to fix this issue. Thank you. I will now turn it over to Dr. Ahart for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. I just want to wish everyone a very peaceful and restful holiday season. This is the last board meeting we have prior to the winter break, and encourage all of our staff to, as much as they can, to once that last day before the winter break comes, that they unplug and take care of themselves and take care of their families and recharge. It's been quite a ride since March, and we are making progress. We're getting more systems in place and refocusing some pieces that were in place and got kind of thrown off track with the treacherous course that we've been on. But really getting back to the core piece, which is instructing our students and pushing that as effectively as we can through the remainder of the year. So I just want to give my heartfelt gratitude to our entire team and wish everyone a safe and restful holiday season.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart. And hearing nothing else, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.